The Grand Marigold Hotel pulsed with its usual morning rhythm, a symphony of polished floors, suitcase wheels, and polite urgency. It was a place of high ceilings and higher expectations, where five-star service wasn't just promised but demanded, and where every detail, from the scent of lemon polish on the banisters to the precision of the bellhop's bow, had to be executed flawlessly. In the middle of it all stood Edward Whitmore, owner of the Grand Marigold, sipping his double espresso near the back of the lobby, his sharp eyes scanning the controlled chaos like a general on the battlefield. Edward had built the hotel from the ground up, well, almost. He inherited the building, sure, but the rest, its reputation, staff, the clientele that included diplomats and celebrities, was the product of sleepless nights, ruthless decisions, and the belief that perfection was a process, never a plateau. He wasn't in the habit of being surprised. Not anymore. But then it happened. So faint, so seemingly insignificant that he might have missed it if he hadn't paused to check a minor stain on the marble counter near the reception. A voice, carried softly through the walkie-talkie left unattended on a room service cart, floated into the air. Bonjour madame, avez-vous besoin d'aide avec les serviettes? The voice said, perfectly, in native French. Edward turned his head slightly. Un momento señora, los laves están en la mesa cerca de la lámpara, the voice continued, this time in Spanish. Another pause. Excuse me sir, breakfast service is still available downstairs, and yes, we can deliver early. He moved toward the source, curious now, the cup of espresso forgotten in his hand. Fluent Japanese. Impeccable tone. Then German, ich bringe das sofort nach oben. And Arabic. Edward stopped. It wasn't just one multilingual guest. It was one voice. One person. Speaking all of them. Effortlessly. Confidently. Compassionately. He picked up the walkie-talkie and checked the channel, housekeeping 3, Jasmine. A maid. He didn't say a word. Instead, he walked briskly back to his office and buzzed his assistant. Claire, pull the staff roster for housekeeping. Do we have someone named Jasmine working today? Claire clicked through her tablet. Jasmine Carter. African American, late 20s. Been here since spring. Quiet, solid worker. Why? Edward didn't answer right away. He looked out across the lobby through the glass walls of his office. Somewhere on the upper floors, a young woman in a maid's uniform was helping people from 5 different continents feel at home, without anyone even realizing. No reason, he said finally, though his voice betrayed something more. Just, keep an eye on her. Meanwhile, on the 12th floor, Jasmine Carter was just finishing making a crib bed for a couple traveling with twin toddlers from Madrid. Her back ached, but she moved quickly, brushing invisible lint from the sheets, adjusting the stuffed giraffe just so on the pillow. The mother, exhausted and flustered, smiled as Jasmine tucked the final corner and handed her a folded list of breakfast options, in Spanish. Gracias, señora, the mother said gratefully. Jasmine nodded, her expression warm. De nada. I'll bring extra juice boxes to your room fridge. Just call if you need more towels. Moments later, the door to room 1210 opened halfway, and an older Japanese man peeked out, clearly uncertain. Jasmine turned to him and greeted him in his own language, asking if he was looking for the elevator. He sighed with visible relief, smiled, and bowed slightly. It was like this all day, small connections, swift translations, unacknowledged grace. Jasmine didn't brag, didn't advertise. She just listened, responded, adapted. It wasn't a performance. It was muscle memory. Born of books and repetition and hardship and heart. 8 years earlier, Jasmine had been a freshman at Northwestern University, studying linguistics and international relations. Her professors had called her gifted. She had dreams of working for the UN, of bridging cultural gaps through language. Then her mother got sick. Then the tuition money ran out. Then her baby brother needed someone to raise him. Life spoke in harsh tones. So Jasmine listened, and answered in kind. Now, she spent her days pushing a housekeeping cart down gleaming hotel hallways, swapping out soaps and sheets, hoping she might one day find a way back to the dreams she shelved for survival. Every language she spoke was a thread connecting her to something bigger than herself. She just didn't know who was listening. Until now. Back in the lobby, Edward paced his office. He wasn't easily impressed. He had seen Ivy League resumes and polished PR interns with enough credentials to paper a wall. But none of them had ever stopped him cold the way this Jasmine Carter had. She didn't know he had heard her. And that made it more remarkable. No ego. No angle. Just ability. He pulled up the internal system and scrolled to her employee record. It was bare bones, high school diploma, some community college credits, no completed degree. No mention of her language skills. No awards, no references beyond a previous hotel in Queens. He leaned back, thoughtful. All this talent, tucked away in a linen closet. He thought of the words his father once told him after they'd lost their family diner to a greedy landlord: the people who change your life usually aren't loud. But if you listen, you'll hear them. It was something he hadn't thought about in years. Outside, in the soft hush of early afternoon, the city carried on. Taxis honked. Tourists snapped photos. But inside the Grand Marigold, something had shifted. A ripple in the air. A spark lit in silence. A hotel owner had heard something no one else had. A maid, unseen by most, had just spoken to the world in 6 voices. And without knowing it, she had started to change everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The hallway of the Grand Marigold was a place of silent efficiency. Sweeping footsteps, the soft clink of cleaning supplies, the occasional murmur of the hotel's chatter. To the guests, the hallways were merely a passage between their temporary homes and the world outside. To the staff, they were the lifeblood of the hotel, an unspoken realm where time moved differently. Jasmine Carter moved through these halls with the fluid grace of someone who had mastered the art of invisibility. No one noticed her. And she preferred it that way. She didn't need the spotlight. She didn't need to be seen. She had a job to do. And she did it well. Her cart squeaked gently as she rolled it down the corridor on the 12th floor. The fresh scent of lavender cleaner mixed with the faint whiff of cologne from the previous occupant of room 1207. She paused at the door, checking her notes on the clipboard she carried. Room 1207, 2 king-sized beds, extra towels, and a set of 3 robe slippers. Simple. She knocked, then pushed the door open with a practiced, almost reflexive motion. The room, one of the more luxurious suites on this floor, was littered with signs of a well-traveled guest: a half-empty suitcase, a spilled glass of water, shoes strewn across the carpet. Jasmine stepped in, surveying the room in a single glance. She immediately went to work. Straightening the bed, folding the towels with military precision, fluffing the pillows until they were just the right height. A glance to the corner of the room revealed a small travel bag, sitting next to the desk. As she was arranging the items on the desk, the sound of a phone ringing echoed through the quiet space. It was the guest's phone, a deep, vibrating sound. Jasmine, with her usual practice, began to tidy the desk around the phone, but then a small voice, almost as if speaking from a distance, caught her attention. "Hello." The voice, foreign, faintly accented, and somewhat hurried, drifted through the room. It was a man speaking in Japanese, and his tone suggested that he was looking for something. As she paused and listened for just a moment, Jasmine caught the words. "Excuse me, where is the fridge in the room?" Jasmine, without missing a beat, set down the notebook she was holding and quickly stepped to the phone. "Excuse me, sir," she said in flawless Japanese. "The fridge is beneath the counter, on the left side. Would you like me to bring you something from it?" The man on the other end hesitated, surprised, and then spoke again in clear Japanese. "Ah, yes, please. Some water and snacks." Jasmine smiled softly, already moving toward the minibar, expertly scanning the assortment of snacks the hotel provided. She selected a bottle of sparkling water and a packet of almonds, placed them on a tray, and headed toward the door. By the time she had delivered the snacks and water, the floor was starting to fill with guests. The bellhops rushed past her, the elevator doors opening and closing with near mechanical precision. The morning had slipped into afternoon, and Jasmine had already completed 2 more rooms, ensuring every detail was attended to with care. She had grown used to the rhythm of it all, moving swiftly from one task to another. But there were days when it felt different. Today, the air was charged with a certain intensity, though she couldn't quite place it. The way the guests lingered a little longer in the lobby, the way the management kept checking their watches, the way she couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was about to shift. Jasmine had learned to listen to those subtle shifts in the atmosphere, both in the hotel and in her own life. They were warnings, signals that something was coming. Maybe it was the steady increase in tasks, the growing number of rooms to clean, or maybe it was the sight of the man who walked by her, Edward Whitmore, the hotel owner, a figure she knew only from brief encounters in passing, but whose presence was undeniable. She had never spoken to him. She didn't expect to. He was part of a world that seemed a universe away from her, his crisp suits, his sharply defined jawline, the quiet authority that surrounded him. He was the face of the hotel, the person who made decisions in boardrooms. And she, well, she was just the cleaning staff. Jasmine adjusted the handle of her cart and pushed it down the hallway toward another room. But just as she passed the elevator doors, they opened, and there he was, Edward Whitmore, standing in the frame, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. She kept her gaze steady, though she couldn't help but feel a flicker of something unfamiliar, an awareness. "Good afternoon," he said to her, his voice warm, yet formal. She blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the directness of the interaction. "Afternoon, sir," she replied, her voice steady. For a split second, they both seemed to stand in that space, her, with the cart of cleaning supplies, and him, the owner of it all. He seemed to be about to say something more, but then the moment passed, and the elevator doors closed silently behind him. Jasmine stood there for a moment, feeling a strange mixture of pride and unease. She didn't think much about her role at the Grand Marigold. It paid the bills, and she was good at it. She knew the ins and outs of every floor, every guest's likely request, every possible mistake they might make. But she never expected to be noticed. Not by someone like Edward Whitmore, anyway. The rest of the afternoon passed in the usual blur of cleaning rooms, answering requests, and ensuring everything was in its place. By the time her shift ended, Jasmine felt the familiar weariness in her bones, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came from a day well spent. But as she stepped into the staff break room to punch out, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The hallway had felt different, the air had felt thicker, and her interaction with Mr. Whitmore, though brief, had left her with a quiet sense of anticipation. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but she had a feeling that she wouldn't be able to ignore it for much longer. The next morning, the air in the Grand Marigold felt different. Jasmine couldn't explain why, but there was an undeniable shift in the way the hotel hummed around her. The usual bustle of check-ins, bellhops rushing past with luggage, and the quiet clinking of dishes from the kitchen were still present, but beneath it all, there was a tension, an electric buzz that seemed to vibrate in the corners of the hotel's halls. She had always been attuned to the subtle undercurrents of the hotel, the kind of things that weren't spoken aloud, but were known nonetheless. Her first task of the day was room 1109. It was a standard cleaning, with a request for extra blankets. As she made her way down the hallway, pushing her cart, she couldn't help but notice the polished surfaces of the hotel that now seemed to gleam just a little too brightly. The lights above her cast long shadows, and the faint sound of the lobby piano drifted up from below. Every corner was meticulously maintained, as it always was. But today, Jasmine felt a curious pressure in her chest, a feeling that she couldn't quite shake. She reached room 1109 and knocked softly, waiting for the response. There was none. Jasmine turned the handle slowly, entering without a second thought. The suite was immaculate. The large windows overlooking the city framed a perfect view of the bustling streets below, and the bed, with its fluffy white linens, was neatly made. Yet there was something odd about the space. It was too quiet, almost too still. Her fingers brushed lightly against the window sill as she made her way to the bathroom, where she started to pull fresh towels from her cart. And then, just as she was folding a hand towel over the towel rack, she caught sight of a small, folded note left on the desk, nearly hidden under a coffee cup. Her heart skipped a beat. She had no reason to be suspicious, but the note was so out of place in a room like this. It was a detail that would normally go unnoticed, but today, Jasmine's instincts told her something was off. She walked over to the desk and picked up the note. It was hastily scribbled in elegant handwriting. I know what you can do. Don't pretend you don't hear it. Your skills, your languages, can take you far. But you have to show them, Jasmine. You have to let them see. The word sent a chill through her. How could someone know? She hadn't shared anything about her ability to speak 6 languages with anyone, not even the staff. It had been something she kept buried in the background of her life. It wasn't something she spoke about, or flaunted. It was just, there. She stood frozen for a moment, the note still in her hand. The idea that someone had noticed, really noticed, her skill, and not in the ordinary way, but in a way that felt almost too intentional, made her uneasy. Who could have left this? And why? Shaking off the unease, Jasmine tucked the note into the pocket of her apron, determined not to let it distract her. It could have been a misplaced message from a guest. After all, people left odd things behind all the time. She quickly finished the rest of her tasks in the room, her hands moving mechanically as she tried to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. The rest of the morning passed in the usual blur, room after room, towel after towel, bed after bed. By the time lunch rolled around, Jasmine was exhausted, but she still couldn't shake the strange feeling from earlier. Every time she passed by the staff break room or caught a glimpse of a guest in the lobby, her thoughts returned to the note. It didn't make sense. Who would know about her talents? As she entered the staff lounge, she caught sight of Claire, one of the front desk attendants, sitting by herself, scrolling through her phone. The younger woman smiled up at her. Hey, Jasmine. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Everything okay? Jasmine hesitated. She wanted to tell Claire, to ask if she had ever heard of anything like this before, but she knew better. It wasn't like her to confide in anyone. She had always kept to herself, even after all these years of working at the hotel. But something in Claire's friendly, open expression made her second-guess herself. I'm fine, Jasmine said, forcing a smile. Just a long morning, you know. Claire raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, she changed the subject, pointing at the small TV screen mounted on the break room wall. You see this? They're doing another story about the hotel's new renovations. They're making a big deal about it. The owner's really pushing it this time, huh? Jasmine looked up at the screen, where a news anchor was talking about a new wave of luxury renovations at the Grand Marigold. A sweeping shot of the hotel's exterior flashed across the screen, and then there was a clip of Edward Whitmore, his sharply tailored suit, his confident smile. He was standing outside, surrounded by cameras and reporters. Jasmine felt a sudden discomfort in her stomach. Something about his face, so calm and poised, felt almost out of reach, like a figure in a distant dream. The hotel was his world, a world she only inhabited as an employee, someone who worked in the background, invisible. Yeah, he's really making sure the world knows this is the place to be, Claire continued, oblivious to Jasmine's inner turmoil. I hear they might even expand to other cities. Big things are happening around here. Jasmine nodded absently. She didn't have much interest in the grand visions of the hotel's future. Her world was small, tied to cleaning rooms, delivering towels, making sure guests didn't have to think about anything. It was a simple life, one that allowed her to keep her head down and stay out of the spotlight. But the note, whoever had left it, was threatening to change that. It gnawed at her, digging deeper into her thoughts. Could it be true? Could she really do something more? Could she really change her life, escape the cycles of routine and monotony that had come to define her existence? Before she could dwell on it any longer, the buzzer on her walkie-talkie interrupted her thoughts. Jasmine, we need you on the 14th floor, stat. Room 1411 needs a quick turn for a VIP guest. She grabbed her cleaning supplies and headed out, but even as she made her way to the elevator, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't know who had left that note. And she certainly didn't know what it meant. But she had a feeling that her life at the Grand Marigold was about to take a turn she couldn't control. The 14th floor was quiet, almost eerily so, when Jasmine arrived. The usual hum of activity, guests moving in and out of rooms, staff rushing from one task to the next, seemed absent here. It was as though the entire floor was suspended in time, waiting. She frowned slightly, wondering if this was the calm before the storm, a sign that her day was about to take another unexpected turn. Room 1411 was located at the end of the hall, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unrivaled view of the city skyline. The door was slightly ajar, and she knocked softly, just in case. But as she pushed it open, the scene before her was anything but ordinary. The room was in disarray. The bed was unmade, sheets half-tucked and pillows scattered. There were several suitcases open, clothes thrown across the floor as if someone had hastily packed and then abandoned the room. Jasmine's eyes moved quickly across the space, assessing the damage. A sense of urgency settled over her. This was a VIP suite, and the last thing the Grand Marigold needed was to appear disorganized to a high-profile guest. She moved in, shutting the door behind her. It was her job to fix things, to make them look immaculate, no matter what state the room was in when she found it. But as she started to gather the scattered clothes and straighten the bed, something caught her eye. A briefcase, sitting on the desk. It was sleek, black leather, and it wasn't supposed to be there. VIP guests didn't leave their business open for anyone to see. Her instinct was to ignore it, to go about her job as she always did. But a flicker of something, the same nagging feeling from earlier, urged her to look closer. Maybe it was the odd sense that something wasn't right in the room. Maybe it was the fact that she had been so attuned to subtle changes in her surroundings recently. Either way, her curiosity got the best of her. Jasmine moved over to the desk and, almost reluctantly, opened the briefcase. Inside, she found something that sent a jolt of surprise through her. It wasn't filled with documents or business papers. Instead, there was a small stack of neatly folded clothing, a pair of sunglasses, and, beneath that, a series of small envelopes. She lifted them carefully, her eyes scanning the names written on the front. Each envelope had a different name, but one in particular stood out. Jasmine Carter. Her breath hitched. The envelope with her name was sealed, the paper crisp and new. But she didn't remember ever having any communication from a guest like this. Her mind raced. Who could it be from? The handwriting didn't look familiar. She looked around the room, but there was no one here, no sign of the guest who had occupied the suite. The idea that someone had left something for her, specifically, seemed utterly bizarre. She stood frozen for a moment, the envelope still in her hand. The fact that her name was on it, written in elegant, flowing cursive, made her feel like she was intruding into something much bigger than herself. It felt like a moment out of a dream, a moment that didn't belong to her. Jasmine knew she should put the envelope back and continue her work. That was the professional thing to do, after all. But something deep within her urged her to open it. After all, who would know her here, in a hotel where she was just another face in the crowd? It was impossible, but yet, here she was. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers, pulling out a single piece of paper. The note inside was brief, but it made her heart race all the same. I know who you are, Jasmine. And I know what you're capable of. The time has come for you to step out of the shadows. You're being watched. What happens next depends on you. If you're ready, meet me at the rooftop garden tonight, at 8 p.m. Don't be late. Jasmine's mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. Who would leave such a cryptic message? And why? Her first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, maybe a joke played on her by one of the other staff members. But then, her thoughts went back to the note she had found in room 1109 the day before, the one that mentioned her skills, the one that had set her on edge. She felt a flicker of recognition, a creeping suspicion that the same person who had written that note might be behind this one. You're being watched. The words echoed in her mind. Someone knew about her ability to speak 6 languages, about her potential. And that knowledge was dangerous. Why would someone want to meet with her? Why now? She stood there for a long time, the envelope still in her hands, trying to make sense of the situation. But nothing made sense. Not the notes, not the sudden attention, not the strange feeling that had been building up within her over the past few days. The minutes ticked by, and Jasmine forced herself to focus on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to dwell on these thoughts right now. She had a job to do. Room 1411 still needed to be cleaned, and the guests would be checking in soon. She put the envelope back in the briefcase, closed it carefully, and moved on, cleaning the room as she always did. But as she finished up the last details, folding the blankets, wiping down the counters, her mind remained preoccupied with the note. Who was this person? What did they want from her? And, more importantly, what would happen if she went to the rooftop garden tonight? The clock on the wall ticked on, its soft, rhythmic sound a reminder that time was slipping away. She was running out of hours, but the mystery only seemed to deepen. By the time her shift ended, Jasmine felt like she had stepped into an entirely new world, one where she was being pulled into something she didn't fully understand. The ordinary routine of her life had already started to unravel, piece by piece. And tonight she would have to make a choice. Would she go to the rooftop garden? Would she take a chance and step into the unknown? As she clocked out and grabbed her coat, she knew that the decision would define the rest of her life. The day slipped away like water through her fingers, and before Jasmine knew it, the clock struck 7:30 p.m. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood in front of her small apartment's mirror, glancing at her reflection for the 100th time. The choice she had made, to meet whoever had written the cryptic note, still felt surreal. She wasn't sure what to expect, but every instinct inside her told her that this was the right thing to do. She had tried to shake off the anxiety, telling herself that it might all be a misunderstanding. Maybe it was just some misguided prank by one of her colleagues, or perhaps a curious guest who didn't know the boundaries of staff and patrons. But deep down, she knew better. There was something about this situation, something too calculated, too specific, that didn't allow her to ignore it. She quickly slipped on a jacket to cover the hotel uniform, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her hair. Jasmine wasn't one for dressing up, she had always found comfort in the simplicity of her usual attire. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she was stepping into something unknown, something that demanded attention, even if only for herself. As she grabbed her purse and headed out, the streets of the city buzzed with activity, a stark contrast to the quiet intensity she felt inside. The lights of the Grand Marigold glowed in the distance, towering over the neighborhood like a beacon. It was only a short walk to the hotel, but every step she took felt heavier than the last, as though gravity itself had grown more insistent. When Jasmine entered the hotel, she was greeted by the usual sights, the luxurious lobby, the concierge smiling brightly, the occasional guest strolling through. But everything seemed muted now, as if the world had slowed down around her, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She walked past the front desk, trying not to make eye contact with anyone, and made her way to the elevator. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and she stepped inside. The cold, polished interior of the elevator made her feel like she was entering some kind of forbidden realm, far removed from the familiarity of her day-to-day routine. The ride to the rooftop was a blur, but the higher she ascended, the more her anxiety grew. As the doors opened, she stepped out onto the rooftop garden, and the city spread out before her in all its glory. The stars above twinkled faintly in the sky, casting a serene light over the hotel's rooftop, where lush greenery and carefully curated flowers lined the edges. The air was cool but pleasant, carrying a hint of floral sweetness from the garden. But it wasn't the beauty of the setting that stole her attention. It was the figure standing in the center of the garden, waiting for her. Tall and composed, the man exuded an air of confidence that was almost unnerving. His sharp suit, dark as night, contrasted with the soft glow of the garden around him, and his posture suggested someone who was used to getting exactly what they wanted. Jasmine froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Was this the person who had been leaving the notes? Was this the one who had been watching her, pulling the strings from behind the scenes? Jasmine, the man said, his voice smooth and calm, like a gentle breeze. I'm glad you could make it. She hesitated, trying to steady herself. Who are you? She asked, her voice wavering more than she wanted to admit. The man smiled, a slow and knowing smile, but there was no warmth in it. He didn't answer her question immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, gesturing to one of the benches near the edge of the garden. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. Jasmine didn't want to sit. She didn't want to make herself vulnerable, but the air between them seemed to hum with unspoken knowledge, as if everything had already been decided long before she walked through the door. Reluctantly, she moved to the bench and sat down, her mind racing as she tried to anticipate what was coming next. The man sat beside her, maintaining just enough space to make her feel like she was on the edge of a precipice. He exuded an almost magnetic pull, a presence that made it impossible to look away. I'm sure you're wondering why you're here, he said, his gaze fixed on her. And why you were chosen. I don't understand, Jasmine admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. What do you want from me? The man leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping gently on the armrest. He didn't seem in any rush to answer, his calm demeanor unnerving in its own right. Let me start by saying that you've been observed for some time, Jasmine. Your work, your intelligence, your potential. It's all been carefully noted. I've seen the way you interact with guests, the way you handle yourself. You're special. Jasmine stiffened, the blood rushing to her face. Was this a joke? A bizarre, convoluted game? She could barely keep her composure, but something inside her whispered that it wasn't. This was real. This man knew things about her that no one else did, and that made her both intrigued and terrified. Special, she echoed, her mind struggling to grasp his words. I'm just a housekeeper. No, he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. You are far more than that. You've been playing a part, Jasmine, a very well-rehearsed part, but it's time for you to step out of the shadows. You have skills, talents that are, not ordinary. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. Her mind flashed back to the note in room 1109, the cryptic message that had haunted her all day. Was this what it meant? Was this the moment that would change everything? I'm not sure I understand, Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man gave her a slight nod, as if anticipating her confusion. What I'm offering you is a chance, Jasmine. A chance to use those talents to do something bigger. Something that will take you beyond these walls. There's an opportunity awaiting you, but it requires more than just cleaning rooms and serving guests. It requires courage. It requires ambition. And most importantly, it requires trust. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest, and a mix of emotions swirled inside her: excitement, fear, confusion. Was this a test? Was she being drawn into something much larger than she could handle? What was the opportunity he was talking about? And why her? You have a choice to make, the man continued, his voice lowering slightly. Stay in the comfort of what you know, or take the leap into something new. Something powerful. You could continue your life as it is, working quietly behind the scenes, blending in with the rest. Or you could come with me, use your abilities to change your life and the lives of those around you. Jasmine sat in stunned silence, trying to digest everything he had said. The thought of leaving her old life behind, of stepping into the unknown, was both thrilling and terrifying. But one thing was clear: this was her moment. The moment when everything could change. So, the man said, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the rooftop. What will it be, Jasmine? Jasmine sat frozen, the weight of the man's words pressing down on her. The city stretched out before her, its lights twinkling like distant stars, yet the world around her seemed to shrink, narrowing to this moment. Her heart raced in her chest, the blood rushing to her ears as she struggled to process what was happening. A choice. A decision that could change everything. She glanced at the man, his face unreadable, yet his eyes held a glimmer of expectation, as if he knew what was going through her mind. His hands rested calmly on his lap, his posture still relaxed, almost too calm for someone offering her such a life-altering proposition. Take your time, he said softly, sensing her hesitation. I know this is a lot to absorb. But think of it this way: what you've been doing, the life you've been leading, has been small. Safe. Ordinary. It hasn't been what you're capable of. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably on the bench, looking down at her hands. She was used to being invisible, used to blending in with the hotel staff, doing her job without drawing attention. The thought that someone had been watching her, analyzing her every move, felt unsettling. But there was also something undeniably flattering about it, something that stirred a desire in her she hadn't fully acknowledged before. I don't know what to say, Jasmine admitted, her voice small, but with an edge of uncertainty. This is all too much. I've worked here for years. This is my life. I'm not sure I could just walk away from it. The man nodded, as if understanding her internal conflict. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a softer, more reassuring tone. I'm not asking you to walk away from everything, Jasmine. I'm offering you a chance to expand. To grow into someone you've never imagined. What you've done until now, it's just the beginning. The work you do here, the skills you've developed, they're part of who you are. But there's more. There's so much more to you. And I can help you unlock it. She looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his in a silent exchange. The pull of his words, the promise of something more, resonated deep within her. She wasn't sure what more meant, but the thought of remaining in her current routine, of always being overlooked, always working in the background, felt stifling now, as if her potential was a flame that had been kept smothered for too long. Jasmine thought of her past, growing up in a small, tight-knit community, her family scraping by, struggling to make ends meet. She had learned early on to keep her head down, to be quiet, and to work hard. She had always been the dependable one, the one who could be counted on to show up and do the job. But deep inside, she had always dreamed of more. She had wanted to do something that mattered, something that would make her feel alive, something that wasn't confined to the walls of the Grand Marigold. This man, this stranger, seemed to offer that chance. But what did he want from her? And why her? Who are you? Jasmine asked again, her voice steady but filled with a hint of suspicion. Why me? The man paused, as if weighing how much to reveal. I'm someone who recognizes potential, he said finally. And you, Jasmine, have been chosen because of what you can do. You have a gift, a rare skill set, and I know exactly how to harness it. You speak 6 languages, you understand people, you observe them in ways that others don't. These are assets, Jasmine. And they're exactly what I need. Her pulse quickened at his words. The idea of being chosen was both flattering and unnerving. Jasmine had always known she was capable of more than her current position allowed, but she had never thought of her skills as something that could be used for anything grand. She had simply kept them to herself, not daring to dream of a life outside the walls of the hotel. What do you want me to do? Jasmine asked cautiously, her mind still swirling with confusion. I'm offering you a path, the man said. A path that leads to more opportunities, more freedom, more power. But it's not just about what you'll gain. It's about what you'll give. The world operates on information, on secrets. People like you, people who know how to listen, how to observe, can get access to those secrets. That's where you come in. He paused, letting his words sink in. I'm offering you the chance to work with me, Jasmine. To be part of something bigger. Something that will change not only your life but the lives of those around you. I can guarantee that you won't be overlooked again. The weight of his words hung in the air, thick with possibility. Jasmine felt her stomach tighten, both with excitement and trepidation. Could she trust this man? Could she take this leap, even if it meant leaving behind everything she knew? She looked around the rooftop, at the garden that seemed to glow in the soft light of the evening. The peacefulness of it contrasted sharply with the storm inside her mind. But even in this tranquil space, she could feel the pull of something bigger, something waiting just beyond the edge of her understanding. And then, as if the decision had already been made for her, a sense of clarity washed over her. She couldn't stay in her old life. She had spent years pretending that being ordinary was enough, that blending in and doing her job well was enough. But it wasn't. She wanted more. She needed more. Jasmine took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. I'm in, she said, her voice firm. I'll do it. The man's lips curled into a smile, one that was both approving and expectant. I knew you would. He stood up, offering his hand to her. Welcome to a new beginning, Jasmine. From this moment forward, everything changes. Jasmine hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was strong, confident, and for the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her. This was the beginning of something she couldn't yet comprehend, but it was a beginning nonetheless. The man gave her a slight nod and then turned, leading her toward the door. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. Let's get started. As they walked away from the rooftop garden, Jasmine didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. The past was behind her now, and the future, whatever it held, was unfolding before her, ready to be claimed. The days following Jasmine's decision felt like a whirlwind. What had once been a life of simple routines and predictable days had now been replaced by a series of briefings, conversations with strangers, and tasks that tested her in ways she had never imagined. Each step felt like a leap into a world that was both exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Her first task came the morning after she had agreed to the man's offer. His name, she had learned, was Victor Hale. He was a businessman, but not the kind that could be easily defined. There was an aura of mystery around him, a certain secrecy that clung to him like a second skin. He wasn't from the hotel industry, or any industry Jasmine could pinpoint. Instead, he seemed to operate in the shadows, gathering information, making connections, and carefully orchestrating events to suit his needs. Jasmine didn't know much about him yet, but she would learn soon enough. She had been briefed on the first steps of her new role, and already she could feel the pressure mounting. She stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, the same one she had stood in just a few days ago before heading to the rooftop. The reflection staring back at her was different now. Her eyes were sharper, more aware. There was a fire burning inside her, a hunger for something bigger than herself, but there was also fear. Fear of the unknown, of stepping into a world where the rules were different, where she wasn't just cleaning rooms and interacting with guests anymore. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Victor. "Meet me at the office. We start today." The office was not far from her apartment, a sleek building tucked away in a quieter part of the city. She had been told little about the place, only that it was where she would begin her real training. The moment she stepped inside, she was no longer Jasmine the housekeeper. She was part of something larger, part of an operation that she barely understood, but one that held the promise of change. The building's lobby was minimalist, with smooth white walls, polished marble floors, and an air of quiet efficiency. A receptionist, dressed in a sharp suit, greeted her with a polite smile. Jasmine didn't have the luxury of lingering in the lobby. She was led to an elevator that whisked her up to the top floor, where Victor was waiting in a spacious, sleekly designed office that overlooked the city. Victor was standing by the window when she entered, his back to her as he gazed out over the skyline. He turned slowly as she stepped inside, giving her that same calculating look he had given her on the rooftop, but this time it was tempered with something else, expectation. "Good morning, Jasmine," he said, his voice smooth, almost businesslike. "You're on time." "That's good." Jasmine nodded, unsure of what to say. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she had learned quickly that Victor didn't deal with small talk. He got straight to the point. "Today is where you begin your real training," he said, walking over to the desk and pulling out a folder. "Inside this folder is your first assignment. You'll be working with a team. These are people I've handpicked for their skills, and they'll be your guides. You'll be shadowing them today, learning the ropes, understanding the mechanics of what we do." Jasmine took the folder from him, her fingers brushing the paper. Inside were names, faces, and detailed descriptions of individuals she would be working with. But what caught her attention were the last words on the last page: "Do not trust anyone completely." Her stomach tightened. What had she gotten herself into? Victor noticed her reaction. "It's nothing personal. In our line of work, trust is a luxury. A dangerous one." His eyes were cold now, his tone turning serious. "You will learn quickly that loyalty is earned, not given. And sometimes, it's a matter of survival." Jasmine swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in. This was no ordinary job. No, this was a world of high stakes, where trust was fragile, and loyalty came at a price. "You'll start by meeting your first team member," Victor continued. "Her name is Lila. She's the one who will show you how we operate on the ground level. She's a specialist in information gathering. You'll need to learn how to read people, how to blend in. This is where your ability to speak 6 languages comes in." Jasmine nodded, feeling the pressure mounting. She wasn't just cleaning rooms anymore. She was being asked to infiltrate, to observe, to extract information from people, without them even knowing she was doing it. Victor smiled faintly as if he could read her mind. "Don't worry. You're capable. I wouldn't have chosen you if I didn't think you could handle it." With that, he motioned toward the door. "Come on. Let's get started." Lila was waiting outside in the hallway, leaning against the wall, a casual but confident stance that immediately put Jasmine on edge. She was tall, with sharp features and dark hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She wore a simple black dress, elegant yet understated. Her eyes, however, were what caught Jasmine's attention, eyes that seemed to pierce through the surface, as if she could see right into Jasmine's soul. "Jasmine," Lila said, her voice smooth and precise, "it's good to finally meet you." Jasmine extended her hand, but Lila didn't take it. Instead, she gave a small nod, as if acknowledging Jasmine's presence without offering much more. There was something about Lila that was both intimidating and intriguing, but Jasmine couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. "We're going to start with something simple," Lila continued, her gaze assessing. "You're going to shadow me today. I'll show you how we gather intel. How we listen, how we read people, and how to find what we need. This is a game, Jasmine. And the rules are simple: don't get caught. And don't trust anyone. Jasmine's heart raced at Lila's words, but she held her ground. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment she stepped fully into a world she had never imagined. Lila led her to a conference room, where a small group of people were already gathered. One man, tall with broad shoulders and a serious expression, was standing by the window. Another woman, younger and with short blonde hair, was sitting at the table, typing rapidly on a laptop. "This is where the real work begins," Lila said, her voice cold and efficient. "Observe everything. Listen to everything. And remember, you're not just here to take notes. You're here to be a part of the operation." Jasmine took a deep breath and nodded. There was no turning back now. As the meeting began, Jasmine's mind raced. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but there was no choice. The door to the life she had always wanted was open, and now it was up to her to walk through it. The days blurred together as Jasmine began her immersion into the world Victor had introduced her to. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and a new layer of complexity to her understanding of what was really happening around her. The team she had joined was not a group of colleagues, they were players in a high-stakes game of intelligence, influence, and power. Jasmine's first lesson with Lila had been a stark awakening. The world she had been thrust into was not kind. It was a world where no one truly trusted anyone, and every interaction, whether with a colleague or a stranger, was part of a much larger, intricate web of motives and secrets. She had already begun to feel the pressure of being a small cog in a very large machine, but as daunting as it was, she couldn't deny the pull of excitement that came with it. She had wanted more, and now she was getting it. Her first real task came on a Tuesday afternoon. Lila had briefed her the night before, offering only a few details. "We need you to observe someone. A hotel guest. His name is Mason Brooks, and he's been staying here for 3 days. We suspect he's more than just a businessman. Your job is to get close, understand what he's doing, and report back." Jasmine hadn't questioned the assignment. There were no questions in this world, just tasks, and then results. That's how things worked. But even with that understanding, she couldn't help but feel the tension in her chest as she made her way through the hotel, searching for the man who was now the focus of her attention. The Grand Marigold was familiar to her in every sense. The layout, the staff, the guests. Everything had been routine. But now, it felt different. As she moved through the lobby, past the golden pillars and the polished floors, Jasmine's mind wasn't on the beauty of the surroundings, it was on her mission. She finally spotted him. Mason Brooks was sitting in the corner of the lounge area, a leather briefcase resting on the table in front of him. His sharp suit, dark hair, and the glint of his silver watch caught her eye, but it wasn't his appearance that piqued her curiosity, it was the way he held himself. He wasn't like most of the hotel guests she had interacted with. He was a man who radiated confidence, control, and something darker that Jasmine couldn't quite place. Jasmine approached the lounge, trying to appear casual. She had learned from Lila to observe, not to rush in. People like Mason didn't reveal anything unless you earned their trust. But Jasmine knew that in order to earn his trust, she would need to be strategic. "Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks," she said, keeping her voice steady and polite as she approached him. Mason looked up from his papers, his gaze sharp as he sized her up. His expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Good afternoon," he replied coolly, his voice deep and measured. "What can I help you with?" Jasmine had rehearsed this moment in her mind. She had to come across as professional and unassuming, but she couldn't help but feel a bit of nervousness creeping in. She had dealt with hotel guests before, but this was different. This was no ordinary interaction, it was part of something much larger. "I just wanted to check in and see how your stay has been so far," she said smoothly, offering a warm smile that she hoped was convincing. Mason seemed to study her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then, without warning, he smiled back, slow, deliberate. "It's been fine, thank you. I have everything I need. But, you know, it's always nice to have someone like you check in. Jasmine felt a small blush rise to her cheeks at the unexpected compliment, but she quickly masked it with professionalism. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Brooks. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. She hesitated for a second before adding, I'll be around, making sure everything goes smoothly. He gave a slight nod, and Jasmine turned to leave, but not before stealing a quick glance at his briefcase. It was locked, but there was something about it, something about the way he clutched it that made her wonder what he was hiding. As she walked away, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment, but there was also an underlying feeling of unease. She had barely scratched the surface, but there was a sense that something wasn't right about Mason Brooks. The way he interacted with her, the way he looked at her, all of it felt calculated. But calculated in a way that spoke of a man who was accustomed to control. Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that she was in over her head. That night, when she reported back to Lila, she recounted the interaction as casually as possible, trying not to let on how unsettled she felt. Lila listened intently, her expression unreadable. You did well, Lila said when Jasmine finished. But don't let your guard down. Mason Brooks is no ordinary guest. We've been watching him for a while. He's not just here for business. We believe he's connected to something bigger. Something dangerous. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Dangerous? The word echoed in her mind, and she couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. Was she truly ready for this? Lila's eyes softened for the briefest moment, as though she had noticed Jasmine's discomfort. It's okay to be scared, Jasmine. But don't let that fear paralyze you. Fear is a tool. If you can use it, it'll keep you sharp. But if you let it control you, it'll destroy you. Understand? Jasmine nodded, her mind racing. She had felt fear before, everyone had. But the kind of fear Lila was talking about was different. It was the kind of fear that came with knowing that nothing was what it seemed. That people, places, and situations could change in an instant, and if you weren't prepared, you would be left behind. The next morning, as Jasmine prepared to go back to her usual duties at the hotel, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had irrevocably changed. Every moment now carried a weight, a significance that she hadn't experienced before. Even the simple act of walking through the hotel lobby felt different. She was no longer just a housekeeper. She was a player in a game that was far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. As she passed the front desk, she caught sight of Mason Brooks once again, sitting in the same spot, his briefcase resting by his side. This time, their eyes met, and for a brief second, she could have sworn there was something more, something deeper, behind his gaze. It was as if he knew something she didn't, and that realization sent a chill down her spine. Jasmine took a steadying breath and continued on her way. There was no turning back now. She had stepped into a world full of shadows and secrets, and the only way out was through. The following days felt like a blur. Jasmine's once predictable life, defined by simple routines of cleaning rooms and welcoming guests, had now become a chessboard of shifting pieces. Each step she took, every glance she cast, felt calculated, filled with purpose. It was no longer just about doing her job, it was about becoming someone else. And though she had learned to embrace the thrill of the unknown, there was a part of her that still wondered if she was in too deep. Victor had been watching her progress closely. After her first interaction with Mason Brooks, he had sent her a brief message, "Good work. Stay close. Keep learning." The stakes are higher now. She didn't need to ask what he meant. It was clear. Mason was more than just a suspicious guest. He was part of something bigger, a piece of a puzzle Jasmine wasn't yet ready to solve, but she was now entrenched in it whether she liked it or not. Her next meeting with Lila came the following morning. Lila had always been precise in her instructions, never too much information, always enough to keep Jasmine moving forward, but not enough to reveal the entire picture. It was a strategy, Jasmine had quickly realized, designed to keep her from asking too many questions while pushing her to perform at her best. Today, Lila was waiting for her in one of the quieter rooms in the hotel's staff area. The room, like most things in this world, was understated but functional, with sharp lighting, a table full of papers, and a giant whiteboard covered in names and locations, most of which were completely unfamiliar to Jasmine. "Sit down," Lila ordered as she entered, her voice curt, her eyes focused on the whiteboard. Jasmine sat, trying to suppress the unease that had become a constant companion. The office, the whiteboard, the papers, it was all a reminder of how far she had gone from her original role as a housekeeper. Everything felt urgent now. "We need you to take a step further," Lila said, her tone businesslike but laced with an edge that made Jasmine's heart skip a beat. "Mason Brooks isn't just here for leisure, and he isn't just playing around with information. He's involved in something we need to know more about. He has connections to some powerful people. Our intel suggests he's a middleman in a much bigger operation, and we need someone on the inside." Jasmine's mind raced. A middleman? A bigger operation? She had assumed Mason was just some businessman who didn't know how to leave the hotel lobby, but now it seemed that he was a critical piece in something far more dangerous. Lila continued, "Your job is simple, observe. Listen. You've made initial contact. Now, we need you to get closer. You'll be shadowing him more closely, but this time you'll be following his every move, every word. Get the details. We'll handle the rest." Jasmine nodded, but inside, her anxiety spiked. She wasn't sure she was ready for this level of involvement. What had she gotten herself into? Lila leaned forward, her voice lowering slightly. "Don't worry. You're capable. And if you can pull this off, you'll be one step closer to understanding the bigger picture. There's power in knowledge, Jasmine, but only if you can wield it properly." Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to keep her hands steady. "What exactly am I looking for?" Lila's eyes narrowed, her face unreadable. "Everything. Be alert. Mason's network is vast, but it's also fragile. One misstep, and the whole thing could come crashing down. You've been chosen because of your ability to blend in. It's time to use that skill." Jasmine couldn't help but notice the coldness in Lila's voice. She wasn't just giving an order, she was handing over responsibility, and Jasmine knew she had to perform. Failure wasn't an option. The next afternoon, Jasmine found herself once again walking through the familiar halls of the Grand Marigold. She had been given her task, to keep tabs on Mason, to understand what he was doing, where he was going, and who he was meeting. The job seemed simple enough, but the tension in the air was palpable. She had learned quickly that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed in this world. She spotted Mason in the lobby near the lounge, his sharp suit making him stand out against the plush surroundings of the hotel. He was talking to someone, another guest, she assumed, but Jasmine's attention was immediately drawn to the briefcase. It was always the briefcase. It seemed almost symbolic, his lifeline, his secret. But she had yet to discover what it contained, and that was the next piece of the puzzle she needed to figure out. As she walked past, pretending to straighten a nearby vase, Jasmine made sure to casually overhear their conversation. Mason was speaking in low tones to a tall man with dark sunglasses, his voice a mix of confidence and secrecy. "I told you, we need to handle this quietly," Mason was saying. "If the others find out, it could ruin everything. Keep it under wraps until I say otherwise." The words were sharp, the tension between them thick. Jasmine's pulse quickened. The others? What was Mason involved in? She had no way of knowing, but the mention of ruin everything hinted that whatever was going on, it was much more dangerous than she had initially thought. She moved away quickly, but her mind was racing. She needed to get closer. This wasn't just about observing anymore, it was about understanding what Mason was up to, what he was hiding, and why. As she made her way back to the staff area, she overheard snippets of conversation from some of the hotel's senior staff. Her ears pricked as one of them mentioned Mason's name again. "He's here for a reason, no doubt," said one woman, shaking her head as she organized some files. "Too many people coming in and out, too many calls. If you ask me, something's up." Another staff member added, "I overheard him talking to someone earlier. He's got connections, serious ones. The kind that'll get you in trouble if you're not careful." Jasmine's heart thudded in her chest. Her instincts were screaming at her now, this was no ordinary guest. And there was something bigger at play, something far beyond the boundaries of the Grand Marigold. She was a small part of this operation, but the more she learned, the more she realized she was getting tangled in something much darker. That evening, as Jasmine prepared to head home, she passed by the lounge once again. Mason was sitting there, his briefcase still by his side. This time, however, he wasn't alone. He was engaged in a quiet but intense conversation with a man who looked out of place. His attire was nondescript, black jacket, dark jeans, but his posture, the way he scanned the room constantly, spoke volumes. Jasmine's curiosity got the better of her. She moved closer, staying out of direct view, and tried to listen in. The words came through faintly, but she caught enough to make her blood run cold. "We need to move faster," the man said, his voice low. "If we don't, it'll all fall apart. You know the risks." Mason's voice was more measured, controlled. "I understand. But we're not making any moves until I have confirmation. It's too risky right now." Jasmine's stomach twisted. Confirmation of what? She wondered. And who exactly was Mason working with? Her heart pounded in her chest. She knew one thing for certain now, she was no longer just a bystander in this game. She was part of it, whether she liked it or not. And if she wasn't careful, she might find herself trapped in a game with no way out. The air felt thicker with each passing day. Jasmine had always been able to sense the subtle shifts in the world around her, but now, every glance, every gesture, seemed to hold meaning. She was learning to read people in ways she hadn't thought possible before. In this new world of intrigue, nothing was as it appeared. And the deeper she dug, the more uncertain she became about where the lines were drawn. The following morning, after her tense conversation with Mason and the cryptic meeting she had overheard, Jasmine's mind was racing. What was Mason involved in? The questions felt like chains, pulling her deeper into a maze she wasn't sure she could escape from. And the more she learned, the more she realized how little she actually knew. Victor hadn't contacted her again since the night of the Mason encounter, and she knew that meant something. Either he was watching, waiting for her next move, or he was testing her ability to navigate this alone. But Jasmine wasn't sure which it was. Was she still part of the plan? Or was she on her own now? She stood in front of the mirror in her small hotel room, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a cold glow on her reflection. The woman staring back at her didn't look like the same person who had walked into the Grand Marigold months ago. She had always been quietly competent, content to work in the background, doing her job without attracting attention. Now, she was someone else. Someone who had seen too much, who had been pulled into a web of secrets and lies that were unraveling before her eyes. There was a knock at the door, jolting her from her thoughts. She quickly smoothed down her uniform and opened it to find Lila standing in the hallway, her expression unreadable. "Get your things," Lila said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We're going out. I need you to follow up on something. Mason's actions are becoming too unpredictable, and I want to see how you handle it." Jasmine felt a pang of unease, but she didn't question Lila. She had learned quickly that questioning wasn't part of the deal. If you wanted to survive in this world, you followed the orders and hoped you could make it out in one piece. Within minutes, Jasmine had grabbed her things and was following Lila through the hotel's back corridors. The sun had just set, casting long shadows across the parking lot as they headed toward a sleek black car that was waiting for them. Lila climbed into the driver's seat, and Jasmine slid into the passenger seat, the seatbelt clicking into place with a sharp snap. They drove in silence, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Jasmine wanted to ask where they were going, but she knew better than to break the silence. Lila's focus was on the road, her eyes sharp and alert, but there was something about her posture that made Jasmine uneasy. She had always been in control, but tonight, she seemed tense. Like something was on the verge of breaking. After what felt like an eternity, the car came to a stop in front of a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. The kind of place you drive past without ever noticing. The dim streetlights cast a faint glow on the cracked pavement, and Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to enter a place where everything would change. Lila turned to her, her expression as cold as ever. "Stay close. We're not just observing anymore. We're getting into the thick of it. Don't make any noise, don't draw attention. Just follow my lead." Jasmine nodded, her pulse quickening. The air outside the car was thick with tension, and every step they took toward the building seemed to weigh her down. They entered through a side door, the faint smell of dampness and stale air greeting them. The inside was dark, illuminated only by the flickering glow of a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. There were no windows, no signs of life. Just concrete walls and the sense that something was hidden here. "Where are we?" Jasmine whispered, her voice barely audible. Lila didn't answer. She simply motioned for Jasmine to follow her down a narrow hallway. The walls were lined with locked doors, and the floor creaked under their weight as they moved deeper into the building. Jasmine's mind raced. What was happening here? What was Mason involved in? They stopped in front of one of the doors at the end of the hall. Lila placed a hand on the handle, her face hard and determined. She turned to Jasmine and spoke in a low voice, "This is where we find the answers. But remember, this is not about us. It's about Mason. And it's about the people pulling his strings." Jasmine's throat tightened. Who was she becoming? Every instinct in her body screamed to turn back, to walk away from this dangerous path she had been set on. But she couldn't. The pull of the unknown was too strong. Lila opened the door, and they stepped inside. The room was small, and it smelled faintly of tobacco and metal. In the center of the room stood a table, and on that table, Jasmine could see a large, thick folder. The kind of folder that held secrets, the kind that could change everything. There were other papers scattered around the table, some with photographs and others with notes scribbled in hasty handwriting. Lila moved quickly, rifling through the papers. Jasmine stayed back, her heart racing as she watched her mentor search through the contents. The silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by the sound of Lila flipping through the papers. Then, Lila stopped. She pulled out a sheet and held it up. Jasmine could see the shock in her eyes, and for the first time since meeting her, Lila seemed rattled. "This is it," Lila whispered. "This is what we've been looking for." Jasmine stepped closer, her eyes scanning the document. There were names listed, dates, and codes she couldn't begin to understand. But at the bottom of the page, there was one name that stood out, Mason Brooks. Her stomach dropped as she read the words underneath, Mason Brooks, Primary Contact, Level 1 Operations, Global Reach. Lila turned to Jasmine, her eyes burning with intensity. "This goes deeper than I thought. Mason's no middleman. He's the key." Jasmine's pulse quickened. "What does this mean? What is he involved in?" Lila's gaze hardened, and her voice was steady but filled with resolve. "It means we're running out of time. And it means everything you thought you knew about this operation is about to change." Jasmine stood frozen, her eyes scanning the documents on the table, her heart thudding in her chest. The words global reach echoed in her mind, reverberating through her entire being. Mason wasn't just some high-profile guest at the Grand Marigold, he was at the center of something massive, something international. And she had walked into the storm completely blind. Lila's hands were shaking as she continued to sift through the papers. Her calm demeanor from earlier was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous, a sense of urgency. It was the first time Jasmine had seen her so unhinged, and it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Lila's voice was low but sharp. "We were wrong. Mason is not a simple intermediary. He's involved in something far bigger than anyone realized. Whoever he's working for, they're global. Powerful." Jasmine felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Global? That meant more than just a few shady deals in the corner of a backroom. This could span continents, governments, networks. The enormity of it all left her breathless. What exactly are we looking at here?" Jasmine whispered, the weight of her own question suffocating her. The pieces were beginning to come together, but the full picture was still too hazy for her to grasp. She had to know more. Lila, her fingers now trembling, pulled another sheet of paper from the pile and slapped it down on the table. The paper was marked with several blacked-out sections, but Jasmine could make out enough to understand the gravity of what she was looking at. "This is a list of known associates," Lila murmured, her voice shaking slightly. "These are the people Mason has direct contact with. We're talking about corporate moguls, high-ranking officials, people in power. They control entire industries, maybe even entire countries." Jasmine's mind spun as she tried to process the words on the paper. Corporate moguls. High-ranking officials. It was starting to sound like a conspiracy of global proportions. A wave of dread washed over her as the reality of her situation hit her like a punch to the gut. She was no longer just an innocent bystander. She had been dragged into something much darker than she ever anticipated. "Who are these people?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lila's eyes narrowed. "We don't know yet. But the deeper we dig, the more we uncover. Mason is the key, Jasmine. If we can get close enough to him, we can expose it all." For the first time, Lila's voice wasn't filled with the usual confidence. It was laced with desperation, tinged with something Jasmine couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe? Or was it a sense of inevitability? Whatever it was, it made the room feel smaller, more suffocating. Jasmine swallowed hard, her mind racing. Get close to Mason. She had been doing that already. She had been shadowing him for weeks, listening to his conversations, following his every move. But now, with this new information, everything had changed. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was a participant. A pawn in a game that could cost her more than she was willing to lose. "We have to be careful," Lila continued, her voice steadier now. "Mason's not just playing at being important. He's in this up to his neck. And there are others who will do anything to protect him. Anyone who gets too close is in danger." Jasmine's stomach twisted at the thought. Danger. It was a word she'd been hearing more and more often these days, and she was starting to wonder if she would ever be able to leave this world unscathed. Lila suddenly turned to face her. "I need you to stay focused. You're doing well, but this next step is critical. We need to find out more about Mason's connections, who he's meeting, where he's going, and what he's planning. I need you to gather everything you can. The more we know, the better we can plan." Jasmine nodded, her thoughts swirling like a maelstrom in her head. Gather everything. It felt like an impossible task, but she couldn't back down now. Not when she was already this far in. And the stakes were too high. They spent another few minutes combing through the papers, but everything else was either too vague or too heavily redacted to offer any solid leads. The clock was ticking. Jasmine could feel it. The pressure was mounting, and every second that passed seemed to push her closer to a breaking point. Lila stood up suddenly, grabbing her coat. "We need to go. There's nothing more we can do here right now. But you'll be on your own soon. You're ready for this. And I'm counting on you to get us what we need." Jasmine wanted to ask more questions. wanted to dig deeper into everything she had just learned, but Lila was already moving toward the door, her back straight, her eyes fixed ahead. "We'll contact you soon," Lila said over her shoulder as she opened the door, "but for now, act like everything's normal. Keep your distance from Mason. We don't want to tip our hand." Jasmine watched as Lila disappeared into the dark hallway. Her mind was still reeling, and the weight of the information she had just uncovered pressed down on her chest like a vice. Act normal? How was she supposed to act normal when she was holding the key to something so monstrous? The next few days felt like a blur. Jasmine continued her work at the hotel, her interactions with Mason growing more tense with each passing moment. Every time she crossed paths with him, she couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about her than she realized. His cool, calculating gaze made her skin crawl. There was a part of her that feared he could see straight through her, that he knew she was onto him. Still, she had a job to do, and she played her part, making sure to follow the routine she had learned so well. It was becoming harder to differentiate between the Jasmine she had once been, the quiet, anonymous housekeeper, and the woman she was now, caught in a web of secrets, lies, and global stakes. It was on the fourth day after her meeting with Lila that the first crack in the facade appeared. Jasmine had been walking through the lobby, when she noticed Mason in a corner booth of the lounge, speaking with a new face, someone she hadn't seen before. The man was wearing a sharp suit, but there was something off about him. His eyes darted nervously, and his voice was low, almost conspiratorial. Jasmine's curiosity got the better of her. She had learned to be stealthy, to blend in, and she used every ounce of that skill now, leaning against the bar counter, pretending to clean, as she listened intently to their conversation. Mason's voice was calm, but his words sent a chill through Jasmine's veins. "You know what's at stake," Mason said, his tone steady but edged with urgency. "If we don't move forward now, everything we've built will fall apart." The man nodded quickly, his face pale. "I understand. I'll take care of it. But we have to make sure no one knows we're involved. This is bigger than we anticipated." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. No one knows. Were they talking about her? Or was it someone else? Mason leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Make sure she doesn't find out. We can't afford to have her in the way." Jasmine's blood ran cold. Who was he talking about? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The words Mason had just spoken hung in the air like a cloud of smoke, suffocating Jasmine's thoughts. Make sure she doesn't find out. The phrase repeated over and over in her mind. She didn't know who he meant by she, but every part of her being screamed that it was her. He was talking about her. She was the one who was in the way. Her hands trembled as she wiped down the counter, the cloth almost slipping from her grasp. Her breath was shallow, her heart hammering in her chest as she fought to maintain her composure. The last thing she wanted was to draw attention to herself, but every instinct told her that she needed to know more. She needed to understand what Mason had meant. What did they know about her? And what was their plan? Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Jasmine forced herself to calm down. Panic wouldn't help her now. She needed to think. The best way to figure out what was happening was to keep playing her part. Act normal. Keep her distance. If Mason was involved in something as big as Lila had said, then the answers would reveal themselves, one way or another. As Mason finished his conversation, he rose from the table and nodded to the man across from him. Their eyes met for a moment, and then the man left, his footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent lounge. Mason lingered for a second, his gaze sweeping over the room, before he stood and made his way toward the elevator. Jasmine knew she had to act fast. She couldn't let him out of her sight. For the next few hours, she kept her distance, watching Mason from afar as he went about his business. He moved with a purpose, his demeanor cool, collected, as if he knew exactly where he was going and what he needed to do. But Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He was hiding something, something far bigger than just business meetings or the casual affairs she had seen him involved in before. Around midday, Jasmine received a message from Lila. It was short, simple, and yet, it sent a chill down her spine. Meet me at the usual spot tonight. We need to talk. Jasmine's heart raced. The usual spot. The same place they had met before, the place that felt more like a secret den than a safe haven. Every part of her screamed that something was happening. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture was still too blurry, too fragmented for her to fully understand. The only thing she knew for sure was that she was getting closer to the truth, and with each step forward, the danger grew greater. That evening, after her shift, Jasmine made her way to the hidden spot where she and Lila had met in the past. It was a small, dimly lit room tucked behind the hotel's kitchen, away from the prying eyes of the staff and guests. The air was thick with the smell of stale food, and the walls were adorned with posters of old music concerts. Nothing that would suggest the room had any importance. But to Jasmine, it was where her world had begun to unravel. She pushed the door open, and Lila was already there, sitting at the small table, her face unreadable. There was a tension in the air, thick enough to cut through. "You're here," Lila said, her voice colder than usual. She motioned for Jasmine to sit down. "I need to know everything. What did you hear today?" Jasmine hesitated for a moment, then recounted everything, the conversation with Mason, the man in the suit, the chilling words that still echoed in her mind. Lila listened intently, her brow furrowed, and when Jasmine finished speaking, there was a long silence. Lila finally spoke, her voice low, her words deliberate. "This changes everything." Jasmine's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Lila looked up at her, her eyes narrowed. "Mason is trying to distance himself. He's afraid. And that means we've been too close to the truth for comfort." Jasmine's mind was spinning. Mason is afraid? The idea was almost laughable. He always seemed so composed, so in control. But now, hearing Lila's words, it was clear that things were not what they seemed. "What are you saying?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lila's gaze was steely. "I think we're being watched. Not just by Mason, but by others, people higher up, people who know about us and our investigation. People who want to keep this under wraps. And if Mason's involved with them, it means we're in more danger than we realize." Jasmine felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The room suddenly felt smaller, more suffocating. She had suspected something was off, but now, it was becoming all too real. Lila stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the city lights below. Her silhouette was sharp against the dim glow of the streetlights, and for a moment, Jasmine wondered just how deep Lila was into all of this. How much did she know? How much was she willing to sacrifice? "What happens now?" Jasmine asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. Lila turned to face her, her expression hard. "Now, we keep moving forward. But we're going to have to be careful. If Mason is as afraid as I think he is, then he's about to make a move. We need to be ready for that." Jasmine nodded, her stomach turning with unease. She had no idea what kind of move Mason was planning, but one thing was clear, this was no longer just about exposing secrets. This was about survival. And survival in a game like this meant staying one step ahead, no matter what. The following days were filled with a new level of caution. Jasmine was hyper-aware of her surroundings, always scanning for any sign that someone was watching her. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Every encounter with Mason, every casual conversation, felt like it had hidden meaning. Her world had become a series of puzzles, each piece more complex than the last. But as the tension between her and Mason grew, so did her understanding of the stakes. It wasn't just about power or money. It was about control, who held it, who wanted it, and who would stop at nothing to get it. The walls were closing in on her, but she wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. The world felt like it was shifting beneath Jasmine's feet. Every day, the tension thickened, the walls closing in around her as the stakes grew higher. Each conversation with Mason left her feeling like she was walking a tightrope, one wrong step and it could all come crashing down. She had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. And yet, she knew she couldn't back down now. The message from Lila had been clear: stay focused. Mason's about to make a move, and we need to be ready. But what did that move look like? Jasmine could barely wrap her mind around what was happening. One moment, Mason seemed like the perfect, untouchable figure. The next, he was a man caught in something far deeper and far darker than she could have imagined. It was late in the evening when she found herself outside Mason's suite again, her mind racing with questions. She had been here more times than she cared to count, each time getting closer to a truth that seemed just out of her reach. Tonight, however, felt different. The air was heavy, charged with a sense of anticipation that she couldn't shake. She adjusted her uniform and walked into the hotel lobby, moving as casually as she could, though every nerve in her body was on high alert. She had been instructed to act normal, to blend in. But the truth was, normal didn't exist in her world anymore. And with every passing day, it became harder to pretend that she wasn't deep into something she had no business being a part of. She reached the floor where Mason's suite was located, the hallway eerily quiet. The sound of her footsteps echoed against the polished floors, almost too loud in the silence. The elevator doors dinged softly as she stepped off, and she was alone. When she arrived at Mason's door, she took a deep breath and knocked twice, a practiced move. No response. She knocked again. Still nothing. A knot twisted in her stomach. Was he expecting her? Maybe not. But this was part of the plan. Get close, blend in, gather whatever information she could. This was how it had always worked. Then, as if on cue, the door swung open. Mason stood there, dressed in a dark suit that looked tailored to perfection, his posture straight, exuding an air of unshakable confidence. But tonight, there was something different about him. Something that made Jasmine's stomach flip. His eyes were darker than usual, his expression unreadable. And the usual calm that surrounded him seemed replaced by something else, something colder. "Jasmine," he said, his voice smooth, but there was an edge to it. "I wasn't expecting you tonight." She forced herself to smile, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. "Just doing my rounds, Mr. Brooks. Is everything okay?" He studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering longer than usual. She felt the weight of his scrutiny, as though he was measuring her, calculating something just beyond her reach. "Everything is fine," he replied, stepping aside to let her in. "Come in. I could use some company." Jasmine hesitated, but only for a split second. She wasn't going to let him see how uneasy she was. This was her chance to get closer, to see if she could learn anything new. She stepped inside. The suite was as luxurious as ever, the view of the city lights sprawling out before her like a glittering sea of gold. Everything about the place screamed power and wealth, everything that Mason was. She was used to it by now, but it still made her feel small, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Mason gestured toward the sitting area. "Have a seat. I was just about to order dinner. Care to join me?" Jasmine took a seat, keeping her movements measured and deliberate. "Thank you, but I'm just here to check on the room, Mr. Brooks. I'll be on my way soon." He waved his hand dismissively, clearly not interested in the small talk. "I'm not one for formalities, Jasmine. I've noticed you've been working here for quite a while. But we've never had a real conversation, have we?" Jasmine froze. A real conversation? Was he trying to make her feel comfortable? Or was he trying to probe her, figure out just how much she knew? Either way, she couldn't afford to let her guard down. "We've had a few," she said, her voice cool, "but I suppose they've always been about business." Mason smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, business. And I've seen you around. You're good at your job. Quiet. Observant. But I wonder, Jasmine, what you're really interested in." The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. It was too casual, too knowing. Jasmine felt a sudden wave of unease flood her chest, but she masked it quickly, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm not sure I understand," she replied. "I'm just a housekeeper, Mr. Brooks. I do my job and move on." Mason studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, like a storm was brewing on the horizon. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. She had to keep it together. This was just part of the game. But deep down, she felt something shift. Mason wasn't just toying with her. He was testing her. He knew something. And he was trying to draw her out. "You know, Jasmine," Mason said after a long pause, "you remind me of someone. Someone I used to know." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. Someone he used to know. The words hung in the air, confusing her. Was he talking about someone from his past? Or was it just a ploy? "Who?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of curiosity despite herself. Mason's smile faltered slightly, as though he was weighing his words carefully. A woman who wasn't afraid to look beneath the surface. To ask the hard questions. "But I wonder, Jasmine, are you like her? Or are you just playing the part?" Jasmine's mind raced, trying to piece together the meaning of his words. The tension in the room was palpable now, and she could feel the walls closing in. He wasn't just trying to figure out if she was a threat. He was trying to manipulate her, to see how much she was willing to reveal about herself. Before she could respond, the door to the suite opened, and a man entered. It was the same man she had seen Mason talking to in the lounge earlier, the one wearing the sharp suit, the one who had seemed so nervous. Mason stood up immediately, a flicker of irritation passing across his face. "I told you I didn't want to be disturbed." The man, undeterred, nodded quickly. "I'm sorry, sir. But it's urgent. We need to discuss the meeting." Mason's expression hardened, but he didn't argue. "Give me a moment. Wait outside." The man glanced briefly at Jasmine before stepping back into the hallway. The door shut quietly behind him, leaving Jasmine and Mason alone again. But the moment was lost. The game had changed. Jasmine stood up, her mind reeling. Something was happening, something bigger than she had anticipated. And Mason was at the center of it. "I should go," she said quickly, turning toward the door. She couldn't stay here any longer. Every moment felt like it was getting harder to breathe. Mason didn't stop her, but as she reached for the handle, he spoke again, his voice softer now, almost contemplative. "Be careful, Jasmine. People like us, we don't always know who we can trust." Jasmine froze for a moment, her hand still on the doorknob. Those words, their weight, the quiet threat behind them, settled deep in her gut. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze one last time before walking out of the room, the door closing softly behind her. The world outside seemed just as it always had, the same bustling hotel lobby, the same guests moving about their business. But for Jasmine, nothing would ever be the same again. She was deeper into this than she had ever intended to go. And there was no way out now. Jasmine's steps echoed down the hotel hallway, each sound more pronounced than the last. The encounter with Mason had left her unsettled, and now she was more determined than ever to uncover the truth behind his cryptic words. He had known something. Something deeper than what he had let on. She could feel it in her bones, and the more she tried to ignore it, the more the unsettling thought gnawed at her. Her thoughts drifted back to Mason's last words, "Be careful, Jasmine. People like us, we don't always know who we can trust. The tone in which he said it was almost too casual, but there was an undercurrent of menace that was impossible to ignore. What did he mean by, people like us? Was he referring to the kind of life he led, the people involved in his world, or was he trying to say something more personal? And who was, us, in this scenario? Jasmine was beginning to wonder if she was in over her head. As she approached the elevator, she couldn't shake the feeling that Mason had been watching her more closely than she'd realized. His gaze, always so calm, had held something else that night. Curiosity. Suspicion. Or maybe even something more sinister. The elevator dinged as the doors opened, and Jasmine stepped inside, pressing the button for the staff floor. As the elevator ascended, her reflection in the polished steel doors looked almost foreign to her. Who was she now? The quiet, observant housekeeper? Or something more dangerous, caught in a game where the rules were constantly shifting? The doors opened with a soft chime, and Jasmine walked out, heading toward the break room. She needed to clear her head. As she pushed the door open, she was surprised to see Lila sitting at the table, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly together. Lila? Jasmine asked, her voice low with concern. Lila looked up, her eyes dark and tired. You're here, she said, her tone flat. She sounded defeated, something Jasmine had never heard from her before. Lila was always the confident one, the one who kept everything together, even when things seemed impossible. But now, there was an edge of worry in her voice that sent a chill through Jasmine. What's going on? Jasmine asked, moving to sit beside her. Lila leaned in, lowering her voice as if to make sure no one could overhear. Jasmine, I've been digging into Mason's past. Into everything connected to him. What I found, she paused, her fingers tightening around the cup of coffee in front of her. It's bigger than I thought. Much bigger. Jasmine leaned in, her pulse quickening. What do you mean? What did you find? Lila's eyes flickered around the room, scanning the quiet corners as if expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. After a few tense seconds, she finally spoke. Mason isn't just a hotel owner. He's a part of something far more dangerous. A network of powerful people involved in illegal dealings, money laundering, human trafficking, and more. He's the frontman, the public face. But there are people behind him, pulling the strings. Jasmine's stomach churned. The words felt like a punch to the gut. She had suspected something dark was happening around Mason, but she never imagined it was this deep, this dangerous. He's involved in all of that? Jasmine whispered, the weight of the revelation almost suffocating her. Lila nodded grimly. Yes. And it's not just Mason. It's his associates, the people he works with. It's a whole network of corrupt individuals. And what's worse? Lila trailed off, her eyes dark with fear. I think they've noticed us. The hair on the back of Jasmine's neck stood up. What do you mean, noticed us? Lila leaned forward, her voice barely audible. I think Mason knows we've been digging. I think he's on to us. And if he's involved in all of this, that means we're in grave danger. The words hit Jasmine like a tidal wave. Danger. Her mind raced with the implications of what Lila was saying. If Mason's associates were involved in criminal activity, then Jasmine wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was tangled up in something far darker than she ever could have imagined. We need to be careful, Jasmine said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. If Mason knows we're after the truth, we can't let him catch on. Not yet. Lila nodded, her face pale. I'm not sure how much longer we can keep this up. If Mason is part of this network, we're in over our heads. And the people he works with, they're dangerous, Jasmine. They don't play by the rules. If they get wind of what we're doing, her voice trailed off as the weight of her own words sank in. Jasmine didn't need to hear more. She already knew the danger they were in. But something inside her refused to back down. She had come too far to turn back now. "Then we keep going," Jasmine said, determination flashing in her eyes. "We can't stop now. Not when we're this close." Lila looked at her for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, she stood up. "I agree. But we need to move carefully. Mason is smart. He'll be watching us more closely than ever." Jasmine knew Lila was right. They were no longer just investigating Mason. They were in the crosshairs of something far bigger. But the more Jasmine thought about it, the more determined she became. If there was a chance to bring this network down, they had to take it. No matter the cost. Later that night, Jasmine found herself back in the hotel's corridors, her heart pounding in her chest. The meeting with Lila had shaken her to the core, but it had also solidified her resolve. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. She passed by Mason's suite once again, but this time, something was different. The door was slightly ajar, and the faint sound of voices drifted through the crack. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. She couldn't afford to be seen. Not now. Jasmine's breath hitched as she moved quickly to the end of the hallway and hid behind a pillar, hoping Mason wouldn't notice her. She strained to listen, but the voices were muffled, too distant to make out any words. However, she did catch one thing, the unmistakable sound of a familiar name. Lila. Jasmine's stomach twisted. What were they talking about? Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the break she had been waiting for. She had to know what was going on. She had to hear it. She crept closer, her breath shallow, her heart thudding in her chest. She peered around the corner, her eyes narrowing as she saw Mason and two other men standing in the doorway, deep in conversation. "We can't afford any slip-ups," one of the men said. "If they're on to us, we need to move quickly. We can't let them take everything we've worked for." Mason's voice, low and steady, followed. "I know. I'll handle it. No one finds out what we're doing. Not until it's too late." Jasmine's pulse raced. Who was he talking about? Were they talking about Lila? About her? Before she could make sense of anything, a noise behind her startled her. She whipped around, her breath catching in her throat, but there was no one there. Still, her mind was racing. There was no doubt now. Mason was involved in something bigger than she could imagine. And he would stop at nothing to protect it. Jasmine's heart pounded as she quickly retreated back into the shadows, her mind already plotting her next move. There was no turning back now. Jasmine's mind whirled as she retreated into the shadows, her pulse racing in her ears. She had overheard enough to confirm her worst fears. Mason was deeper into this dark world than she ever could have imagined. And the worst part? He was onto her. Onto her and Lila. The game had changed, and it was no longer just about investigating him. Now, it was a fight for survival. Her heart thudded in her chest as she ducked back into the hallway, making sure her footsteps were soft, her movements as quick and quiet as possible. She knew she couldn't stay here much longer. It was only a matter of time before Mason or one of his associates discovered what she and Lila were up to, and when that happened, there would be no more chances to get out. The danger was real. The sound of a door opening behind her made her freeze, her heart leaping into her throat. She barely had time to react before a familiar voice called her name. Jasmine. It was Lila, her voice sharp with urgency. Jasmine exhaled in relief, her tension melting as she turned to face her friend. "Lila, you scared me," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Lila's eyes were wide with fear, her face pale in the dim light of the hallway. "I overheard them talking," she said, breathless. "I didn't think they knew." "But they do, Jasmine. They're going to come after us. We have to act fast." Jasmine nodded, her mind racing as she quickly took in Lila's words. I know. I heard enough to know that they're aware of us. And whatever they're hiding, it's a lot bigger than I thought. Lila swallowed hard, her expression tense. We need to get out of here. If Mason is involved in all that illegal activity, we're not safe. Not anymore. We can't just walk away from this. Jasmine looked at her friend, her stomach churning. I don't want to run, Lila. We can't just leave this behind. Not when we're so close. Lila's eyes softened, but there was a hint of desperation in her voice as she spoke. Jasmine, we're not talking about a small operation here. If Mason is really involved in that kind of network, we could be dead before we even know what hit us. I don't know what's worse, the fact that they know about us, or the fact that they might be planning something even worse. Jasmine felt the weight of Lila's words sink deep into her chest. It was one thing to play the role of an investigator, to search for the truth. But it was another thing entirely to be caught in the crossfire of a criminal enterprise so vast, so dangerous, that it could swallow them whole. I'm not backing down, Jasmine said firmly, her voice low but resolute. Not yet. There's still something we don't know, Lila. Something Mason is hiding. If we leave now, we'll never find out what it is. And that means we'll never be able to stop him, or anyone else. Lila's face softened, though the fear never left her eyes. I get it. You're right. But we need a plan. A good one. We can't just keep walking into the fire without knowing where we're headed. Jasmine nodded. She knew Lila was right. This wasn't a game anymore, and every move they made now would have consequences. But she was too close. They were too close to the truth. Let's go back to the office, Jasmine said. We need to think this through. We need to get ahead of Mason before he makes his next move. Lila hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay. But we need to be careful. One slip up and everything's over. They moved quickly down the hall, staying in the shadows, every footstep calculated and deliberate. They reached the staff office, which was dimly lit and nearly empty at this hour. Jasmine locked the door behind them as they entered, the silence inside almost suffocating. Sitting at the small desk, Jasmine's mind raced. What was Mason hiding? And why was he involved in something so dangerous? They had to get to the bottom of it, and fast. Do you have anything else? Jasmine asked, looking at Lila. Anything that could give us a clue as to what he's really up to? Lila ran a hand through her hair, clearly stressed. I've been digging into Mason's background, but I don't have much. The thing is, Mason's records are clean, too clean. There's no criminal history. Nothing that even hints at the kind of person he might be behind closed doors. Jasmine frowned, deep in thought. So, he's covered his tracks well. But there's got to be something that ties him to this network. Lila nodded slowly. There has to be. He's not just a hotel owner. His connections go way beyond that. I've also found some inconsistencies in his financials, hidden accounts, strange transfers. But it's all coded. We need access to his personal files if we want to figure out what's really going on. Jasmine looked at Lila, a plan starting to form in her mind. We can get into his office. We can get his files. But it has to be tonight. Lila raised an eyebrow. Are you serious? Breaking into Mason's office? That's a bad idea, Jasmine. We don't have a choice, Jasmine said, her voice unwavering. We need those files. If we don't get them, we're dead. Mason's already onto us, and I'm not going to let him get away with this. Lila sighed, running a hand over her face. I can't believe I'm saying this, but, okay. We'll do it. But we need to be careful. Mason's too smart. He's not going to leave his office unprotected. Jasmine's mind raced. She knew the risk, but there was no turning back now. She had to move fast. She had to outsmart Mason. "Let's meet in the staff room in an hour," Jasmine said. "I'll gather what we need. We'll go in, grab the files, and get out. No one can know we were there." Lila nodded, her face set with determination. "We're in this together. We'll get through it. But we need to be smart about it." As Jasmine left the staff room and headed back toward her own quarters, her heart pounded in her chest. This was the point of no return. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. The conspiracy was bigger than she had imagined, and Mason was at the center of it all. She didn't know who she could trust anymore. The only person she could count on was herself. But even as she prepared for what was to come, a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Mason wasn't just a man in charge of a luxury hotel. He was part of something far darker, and that darkness was closing in on them. Jasmine wasn't sure if she was ready to face whatever came next, but she was certain of one thing: there was no turning back now. The clock was ticking. Jasmine stood at the door of her small, dimly lit room, eyes locked on the worn-out leather bag sitting on her bed. Inside it were the tools they'd need for the night. Gloves, a flashlight, a lockpick set, and a few other odds and ends that Lila had pulled together in a surprisingly short amount of time. The adrenaline was starting to pump through her veins, but so was the fear. They were about to break into Mason's office. A hotel owner who had ties to dangerous criminal networks. And if they got caught, if Mason or one of his associates discovered what they were up to, everything would be over. But Jasmine had no other choice. The truth was out there, hidden behind those locked doors, and she had to find it. Her heart raced in anticipation as she grabbed the bag, slinging it over her shoulder and making her way to the staff room. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she knew it was too late to turn back. She had made her decision. The only thing she could do now was follow through. The staff room was quiet when she arrived, the air thick with tension. Lila was already there, her face taut with anxiety, her fingers nervously tapping on the edge of the table. She didn't look surprised to see Jasmine. She'd been expecting her. "We're really doing this, huh?" Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're actually going to break into his office." Jasmine nodded, her expression hardening. "We don't have a choice. We have to do this. We need the files to prove everything. Mason's involved in something bigger than we ever imagined." Lila swallowed, her gaze flickering toward the door. "I just keep thinking about what you said earlier. If we get caught, there's no way out. We could end up in deeper trouble than we've ever been in." "I know," Jasmine replied. "But we're too far in now. We've already risked too much. This is our only shot." Lila nodded, her jaw set in determination. "All right. Let's get this done." The plan was simple, but it wasn't easy. Mason's office was on the top floor of the hotel, in a part of the building reserved for the most important guests. No one went up there without permission. The security around the area was tight: cameras, guards, and restricted access. But Jasmine had spent weeks studying the building's layout, learning the blind spots, the patterns of the guards. She knew where she needed to be, and when. Now, it was all about executing the plan. "We'll move in 20 minutes, Jasmine said, her voice calm but firm. "We'll stick to the hallways that are least visible, and we'll use the service elevator. It's less likely to be monitored. Once we're in the office, we grab whatever we can: documents, files, anything that can tie Mason to his criminal activities. We get in, and we get out. Fast." Lila gave a stiff nod. "And we keep our heads down. No mistakes." Jasmine gave her a pointed look. "No mistakes." The weight of their words hung heavy in the room as they prepared. Jasmine double-checked the bag, making sure everything was in place. Lila did the same, adjusting her black hoodie, making sure it would blend into the shadows. In 20 minutes, they would be inside Mason's world. But in truth, they were already in it. Time seemed to stretch, every second pulling them closer to the precipice. Finally, Jasmine looked at her watch and gave Lila a nod. It was time. They slipped out of the staff room, their movements swift and silent. As they navigated the hallways of the hotel, the lights seemed to dim around them, and every sound echoed louder than it should. Jasmine's senses were on high alert, every step bringing them closer to danger. They passed the front desk, where the receptionist sat, engrossed in a phone conversation. She didn't notice them. They took the service elevator at the end of the hall, the only one not monitored by the hotel security cameras. The elevator creaked as it ascended, and Jasmine's heart hammered in her chest. The seconds ticked away like hours. She could almost feel the weight of the consequences pressing down on her, but she didn't let it show. Not now. When the doors finally opened, they stepped into a quiet, dimly lit hallway that led to Mason's office. The carpet was plush underfoot, the air thick with the scent of expensive cologne and polished wood. The floor was empty, eerily so. There were no guards patrolling this area. Only the occasional sound of a door opening or closing from the distant rooms. Jasmine held her breath. This was it. They were almost there. Lila gestured for Jasmine to follow, and they moved swiftly down the hall, keeping close to the walls. They reached Mason's office door, a massive, oak structure adorned with polished brass handles. It looked imposing, and the lock on the door seemed like an additional layer of security. But Jasmine wasn't worried about that. She dropped to one knee, pulling out the lockpick set. Lila watched the hallway anxiously, her eyes darting from side to side. Jasmine's hands were steady despite the tension. She'd picked locks before. Not on doors this complicated, but the basics were the same. A few clicks, and the door would be open. As her fingers worked the pins inside the lock, she couldn't help but wonder, what would they find inside? What secrets did Mason keep hidden behind that door? It took longer than she expected, but finally, the soft click of the lock signaled success. Jasmine stood up, her breath a little faster than before. Lila gave her a quick thumbs up, and with a quick glance over her shoulder, Jasmine pushed the door open just a crack. The office was dark, but the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminated the vast, expensive furnishings. A large mahogany desk sat in the center of the room, papers neatly stacked and a laptop glowing faintly. Everything seemed carefully curated, as if Mason was trying to present an image of a well-maintained, organized business owner. But Jasmine wasn't fooled. This was the front. This was the mask. Behind all of this, she knew, was something darker. Lila stepped in first, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. Jasmine followed close behind, quickly moving toward the desk. She needed the files, she needed to get to the drawers. She opened the first one, her fingers moving with practiced speed. Papers, contracts, files. Everything appeared to be business as usual. But then, at the back of the drawer, she found something that made her blood run cold. A folder labeled, Private. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was what they had come for. She pulled the folder out and opened it, her eyes scanning the documents inside. The pages were filled with financial records, transactions, and accounts. But what caught her attention was a list of names, names of people she didn't recognize. But there was something else, something that made her stomach turn. There were transfers of large sums of money to foreign accounts. Names linked to criminal organizations. People who weren't supposed to be involved with Mason. Mason is way deeper in this than I thought, Jasmine muttered under her breath. This is bigger than we imagined. Lila glanced over her shoulder. We need to get out of here. Now. Jasmine nodded, grabbing the folder and tucking it into her bag. They had what they came for. But as she looked around the room one last time, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The door creaked open behind them. A figure stood in the doorway. Mason. The air in the office grew thick with tension as Jasmine turned toward the door. Her heart slammed against her chest as Mason stood in the threshold, a shadow of authority and menace, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He had been watching them. He had known all along. Jasmine's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of the folder in her bag, the very evidence that could bring him down. But she couldn't let him see her fear. She couldn't let him see her weakness. "You shouldn't be here," Mason said, his voice low and dangerous, laced with that calm authority that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't move, standing perfectly still, as though he had all the time in the world. Lila, standing a few feet behind Jasmine, visibly tensed. "Mason, we're not looking for trouble," she said, her voice betraying her nerves. "We're just trying to understand what's going on. This isn't what it seems." Mason raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Is that so? Then what exactly are you doing in my office at this hour? And what exactly is that in your bag?" His gaze flicked to the bag slung over Jasmine's shoulder. Jasmine's mind raced. She was trapped. They were trapped. But she couldn't back down now. Not after everything they had risked. She stood tall, forcing a sense of calm she didn't feel. "We have what we need, Mason," Jasmine said, her voice steady, though the tension in her throat was palpable. "We know what you're involved in. This isn't just about a hotel anymore. You've been laundering money. You're connected to organized crime." Mason's expression didn't falter, though a flash of something, anger, perhaps, flitted across his eyes for just a moment. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. His face hardened, the mask of the composed businessman slipping back into place. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said coldly, stepping forward with a deliberate, predatory grace. "You've gotten in way over your head, Jasmine. And I'm going to make sure you regret it." Jasmine's breath caught. There was no denying it now. The reality of the situation had sunk in. Mason wasn't just some businessman trying to protect his image. He was dangerous, he had been playing a long game. Lila's voice cut through the silence. "You don't have to do this, Mason. We don't have to be enemies. We can walk away, pretend this never happened." "Walk away?" Mason interrupted, his voice sharp. "You think I'd let you just walk away after what you've uncovered? No. You're too deep now. And you're not leaving here with that evidence." Before Jasmine could respond, Mason's hand moved with lightning speed, his fingers closing around the handle of a gun tucked beneath his jacket. The cold steel of the weapon gleamed under the low light of the office. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as fear surged through her veins. "You can't do this," Lila said, her voice trembling. She had always been strong, but even now, the fear was impossible to hide. "We have the proof. People will know. You can't just erase us." Mason's lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile, the kind that sent chills down Jasmine's spine. "I can do anything I want," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I've been erasing problems for a long time." He took another step forward, closing the distance between them, and Jasmine instinctively backed away, her hand tightening around the strap of her bag. Her thoughts were scrambling, trying to process what was happening. She had prepared for this, she had prepared for confrontation, for Mason's dark side to come to light, but she hadn't prepared for the sheer intensity of it. She hadn't prepared to be so close to death. "Please," Lila said, her voice desperate. "We won't tell anyone. We'll forget everything. Just let us go." Mason tilted his head, the gun still aimed at them. "It's too late for that," he said softly. "The moment you decided to go after me, you made yourselves targets. Now, I have a decision to make." He looked at the folder Jasmine had stashed in her bag. "Either I take that from you, or I make sure you both disappear." Jasmine's mind raced. She couldn't let him take the folder. That was the one thing standing between him and his freedom. You're making a mistake, Jasmine said, her voice hard, trying to buy herself time. You have no idea what kind of trouble you're in. There's no going back from this, Mason. People will find out what you've been doing. It's only a matter of time. Mason's gaze flickered. For a brief moment, there was a crack in his cold exterior, a hint of uncertainty. But it was fleeting. Before Jasmine could capitalize on it, his expression hardened once again, his grip tightening on the gun. Shut up, Jasmine, he spat. You're not in control here anymore. Lila grabbed Jasmine's arm, her fingers trembling. We need to get out. Now. Please. Jasmine's mind raced. She had one shot. One chance to turn this around. The gun was in Mason's hand, but she was faster. She had to be. She had no choice. As Mason took a step closer, Jasmine reacted on instinct, lunging forward. The sudden movement caught Mason off guard, and for a split second, the gun's aim wavered. It was enough. Jasmine twisted her body, ducking low, and grabbed the edge of the desk for support. She slammed her foot into Mason's knee, sending him stumbling back. The gun slipped from his hand, clattering against the floor, and Lila seized the opportunity. She grabbed the weapon and tossed it aside, just as Mason regained his balance. You think you can get away with this? Mason growled, fury evident in his voice. Jasmine's eyes locked onto his, unwavering. You're done, Mason. Your empire is falling apart. And you'll be exposed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time seemed to stand still, the weight of the confrontation hanging heavily in the air. But Jasmine could see it in Mason's eyes. He was calculating. He was already thinking about his next move. He glanced at the door, then back at them. His gaze hardened, and he straightened, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. But instead of charging forward, he gave them a cold, sardonic smile. You're too late, he said softly. This game is over. Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. What are you talking about? Mason didn't respond. Instead, he turned, walking toward the office door without another word. Jasmine exchanged a quick look with Lila, confusion and fear swirling in her eyes. Was this it? Was he really letting them go? And then, just as Mason reached the door, he paused and glanced back at them, his smile growing wider. You've made a big mistake, Jasmine, he said, his voice dripping with venom. And now, you'll pay the price. With that, he slipped out of the office, leaving Jasmine and Lila alone in the room, shocked, breathless, and unsure of what would come next. The door slammed shut behind Mason with an almost finality to it, echoing in the stillness of the office. The tension that had gripped the room just moments ago still hung heavy, like an oppressive weight pressing down on Jasmine's chest. For a few seconds, neither she nor Lila moved. It was as if they were both trying to process what had just happened, trying to make sense of the encounter that had just escalated beyond anything they could have predicted. What just happened? Lila finally whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. Jasmine stood still, her heart still racing, the adrenaline slowly fading but leaving behind a lingering sense of fear. Mason had let them go. But why? It made no sense. The last thing they'd expected was for him to walk away so easily. And yet, there he was, slipping into the shadows without so much as a fight. Jasmine shook her head. I don't know. It doesn't add up. She moved toward the desk, her mind still reeling from the confrontation. She glanced down at the folder she had taken, now tucked securely in her bag. It was the one thing that could bring Mason to his knees. But why had he let them leave with it? Lila stepped closer, her eyes wide. What do you think he meant when he said we'd pay the price? Jasmine's mind churned. I don't know. But he's dangerous. We can't let our guard down. Not now. She opened the folder carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. She needed to see the documents again. She needed to be sure of what they had before they made their next move. The last thing they needed was to misinterpret something or miss a crucial detail. The information they had in their hands could change everything, could expose Mason and his entire criminal network. But it had to be the right evidence. She flipped through the pages, each one a heavy weight of information. There were financial transfers, documents signed by figures Jasmine didn't recognize, names, addresses, and bank accounts all connected to illegal activities. But the deeper she went, the more her stomach churned. Some of the names on the list were connected to international criminal syndicates. Violent organizations that were far beyond Mason's local operations. "This is worse than we thought," she muttered, almost to herself. Lila leaned in, her eyes scanning the documents. "Is there anything we can use? Anything that can link him directly to the crimes?" Jasmine paused, her fingers tracing a particular page. It was a series of coded messages, one that appeared to be correspondence between Mason and a known drug lord. The language was coded, but the patterns were familiar to her. Jasmine had seen something similar when investigating small-time dealers in the past. This was bigger than anything she'd imagined. "Yes," she said, her voice tight with both realization and fear. "This could be the key. If we can crack these codes and connect Mason to these deals, we have him." Lila let out a breath. "So, we're really doing this. We're going to take him down." Jasmine met Lila's gaze, her mind racing with the implications. "We don't have much choice. We have to. This isn't just about us anymore. There are people's lives at stake. People who have been hurt by Mason's operations. We can't let him keep getting away with this." Lila nodded, but the doubt in her eyes was still there. "But how do we even begin to crack those codes? And what if Mason comes after us?" "We'll figure it out," Jasmine said, her voice stronger now. "We've come this far. We just need to stay one step ahead of him." But as she said those words, something deep inside her gnawed at her, something that felt wrong. They had underestimated Mason before. What if they were doing it again? What if he had already set a trap for them? The thought wouldn't leave her. It clung to her like a shadow, just as it had when they were at the hotel. Mason had played them for so long, using his charm and authority to manipulate the situation. He wasn't just going to let them walk away with the truth. He had to know they had something on him by now. And if he did, he wasn't going to sit idly by. "I don't trust him," Jasmine said, breaking the silence. "I think he's been playing us this entire time. I think he's been waiting for us to slip up." Lila's face paled. "What if he's already coming for us?" "I don't know," Jasmine replied, her voice tight. "But we can't wait around to find out. We need to get to the authorities, get these files into the right hands. The sooner we do that, the safer we'll be." The plan was clear. They couldn't afford to wait. The files had to be sent to someone who could take immediate action. But Jasmine's instincts told her that it wasn't going to be that simple. They had no idea just how far Mason's reach went, or what kind of resources he had at his disposal. If they were going to pull this off, they had to be smarter, quicker, and more prepared than ever. "Okay," Lila said, her resolve hardening. "But where do we go from here? Who do we trust?" Jasmine thought for a moment. "There's a contact I've used before. Someone on the inside, someone who can get this to the right people. But we need to get out of here first." Lila nodded. "All right. We stick to the plan. We move fast." But as the two of them made their preparations to leave, the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside stopped them cold. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. Someone was coming. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. "Quick," Jasmine whispered. "We need to move." Lila grabbed her bag and rushed to the door, peeking through the small crack. Jasmine's heart raced as she waited for Lila's signal. A moment later, Lila motioned for her to follow. The coast was clear. They slipped out of the office and moved swiftly down the hallway, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every corner felt like a threat, every creak of the floorboards too loud. Jasmine's senses were on high alert, the fear and uncertainty gnawing at her, but she couldn't afford to show it. They had made it this far, and now they just had to get out. As they approached the stairwell, Lila stopped suddenly. Her eyes were wide, and she was looking over her shoulder. "I think we're being followed," Lila said in a strained whisper. Jasmine's blood ran cold. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. But the hallway was empty. "Stay close," Jasmine muttered, her mind racing. Something's not right. They had to hurry. They had to get out now. But just as they rounded the corner, they heard it. A loud bang. The door to the stairwell slammed open. And standing in front of them was Mason. The air between them crackled with tension as Mason stood in the doorway of the stairwell. His eyes, cold and unblinking, locked onto Jasmine and Lila with an intensity that made their blood run cold. The sound of the door slamming open echoed through the hallway, a stark contrast to the silence that had settled in the moments before. Jasmine's heart thudded painfully in her chest. They were trapped. There was nowhere to go, no way out. Mason's presence seemed to fill the space, suffocating and overpowering. "You thought you could get away, didn't you?" Mason's voice was low, almost mocking, as he took a step toward them. His calmness was terrifying. It was the calm of a man who had done this too many times, the calm of someone who knew exactly what was at stake. "We have nothing to say to you," Jasmine said, her voice shaky but defiant. She could feel Lila standing next to her, just as tense, just as terrified, but neither of them could afford to show it. "Not now." "Oh, but I think you do," Mason replied, his lips curling into a tight, dangerous smile. He took another step forward. "You've made a mess of things. You think I didn't know what you were doing? You think you could sneak around in my hotel, digging up things that you don't understand?" His eyes flicked down to the folder in Jasmine's hand. Jasmine instinctively clutched the folder tighter. This was it. Everything they had worked for, the evidence, the files, the truth, was in her hands, and Mason knew it. Lila, sensing the gravity of the situation, whispered urgently, "We need to go. Now." He's not just going to stand there. But Mason's voice stopped them cold. "Oh, I don't think so," he said. "I'm not done with you yet." Before Jasmine could even think of a plan, Mason lunged toward them, his movements swift and precise. Instinctively, Jasmine pulled Lila back, shoving her toward the hallway that led to the back of the building, away from Mason. But the sound of heavy footsteps told her it was too late. Mason was faster than she expected. He was right behind them. They ran. Their shoes slapped against the worn linoleum floor as they tore down the hallway, adrenaline pushing them faster than they thought possible. Jasmine's mind raced, trying to calculate their next move. There were no windows, no easy escape routes. Just the hallway that stretched endlessly before them, and the sound of Mason's pursuit echoing in the space behind them. Jasmine's breath came in sharp gasps as she glanced over her shoulder. Mason was gaining on them, his footsteps loud and steady. He wasn't even out of breath. Of course he wouldn't be. He had been doing this for years, chasing, hunting, manipulating. He was trained for this kind of thing. They weren't. "Left. We'll take the back exit," Jasmine called to Lila. They rounded the corner and bolted toward the service door, the only way out of the building that didn't require passing through the lobby where Mason would have more access to the cameras. The door was just ahead, and Jasmine pushed herself harder, willing her body to keep moving, even as the fear began to claw at her. Her hand gripped the door handle, but before she could turn it, there was a loud crack, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Her heart skipped a beat. The bullet ricocheted off the metal door, and she flinched, nearly losing her footing. "Go," she shouted to Lila, her voice filled with panic. But Lila was frozen, her eyes wide with shock, the sound of the gunshot reverberating in her ears. "Mason's serious," Lila whispered. Her voice was barely audible, shaking with fear. Jasmine didn't have time to think. She pulled Lila toward the door, forcing the handle down and slamming it open with all her strength. They spilled out into the alley behind the hotel, the cold air hitting them like a wall. They weren't safe yet. The alley was narrow, the shadows deep, and Jasmine's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to lose Mason. But the sound of his footsteps was still loud and clear behind them. He was close. "I know where we can go," Lila gasped, her voice strained as she tugged on Jasmine's arm. "There's a car parked just a few blocks away. We can make it if we hurry." Jasmine didn't hesitate. She didn't care where they were going, she just needed to get away from Mason. From this nightmare. They sprinted down the alley, every step a beat of their frantic escape. Jasmine's breath was coming in ragged gasps, her legs burning with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. "Not yet. Get to the street, and we can lose him in traffic," Lila urged. Jasmine's eyes darted ahead. The street was just beyond the corner, and with the cover of traffic, they might be able to disappear into the city, at least for a little while. She glanced back over her shoulder. The alley behind them was empty for now, but she knew Mason wouldn't be far behind. When they reached the end of the alley, Jasmine could hear the sound of a car engine. It was their only chance. They couldn't afford to look back now. "Go!" Jasmine urged, and together, they dashed onto the street, their eyes scanning for the car Lila had mentioned. And then, just as they reached the sidewalk, the unmistakable sound of a car engine revved in the distance. "Get in!" Lila yelled, waving her hand toward the parked car ahead. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She grabbed the door handle and threw herself inside, with Lila following close behind. The car lurched forward as Lila slammed the gas pedal, pulling away from the curb and into the traffic. Jasmine's heart was still hammering in her chest, but now it was different. They were moving. They were free, at least for the moment. But Jasmine knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Mason wouldn't stop. He had too much to lose. And now, they had something even more dangerous than Mason's anger, they had the evidence that could bring him down. They had to keep moving. "Where do we go now?" Lila asked, her voice ragged from their run. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on the road ahead, trying to keep her thoughts clear. "We get to the contact," she said finally. "We get this to the right people. We end this." But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. What if Mason had already set a trap? What if they were walking into another one? She didn't know. But she couldn't afford to think about that now. "We have to keep moving," she repeated. And so, as the car raced through the streets of the city, Jasmine's mind was filled with only one thought: they weren't safe yet. The night felt endless as the car sped through the city, weaving in and out of traffic, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a sharp blade. Jasmine kept her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, half expecting Mason's black SUV to appear in pursuit at any moment. But the streets remained quiet. Too quiet. Lila's hands gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, her face pale but focused. They'd been driving for what felt like an eternity, but they couldn't afford to stop. The file in Jasmine's bag, the file that held everything they needed to take Mason down, felt heavier with each passing mile. It was their lifeline, their only hope, and yet the closer they got to handing it over, the more Jasmine wondered if they were walking into an even bigger trap. "You're sure about this contact?" Lila asked, her voice tense. Jasmine glanced at her, trying to sound confident, though doubt simmered just beneath the surface. "Yes. He's a journalist. He's worked with law enforcement before, he knows how to handle sensitive information like this." "But what if Mason already knows? What if he's already been watching us?" Jasmine didn't have an answer for that. She had to believe that they were still ahead of him, but deep down, she knew it wasn't over. Mason was too dangerous to just let them go. He wouldn't stop until they were silenced. They were too close now. He wouldn't risk losing everything he'd built. "We have no choice," Jasmine said quietly. "We need to get this to him. It's the only way." Lila nodded, but the unease on her face didn't fade. The silence in the car was thick with tension, each passing streetlight flickering like a countdown to something inevitable. The phone in Jasmine's pocket buzzed suddenly, slicing through the silence like a sharp knife. Her stomach dropped. Who could it be? They hadn't spoken to anyone since escaping the hotel, and there were no new messages from their contact yet. "Is it him?" Lila asked, glancing nervously at Jasmine. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. Her fingers fumbled for the phone, and when she saw the name on the screen, her stomach lurched. It was Mason. The call had been made just a minute ago, and there was no way it was a coincidence. She stared at the screen for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest. The phone rang again, but Jasmine couldn't bring herself to answer. "Answer it," Lila urged, her voice tight with urgency. "Maybe it's just a bluff." Jasmine hesitated. She knew that answering would only lead to more danger, but there was a chance he wasn't calling to make a threat. He had been unpredictable before. Taking a deep breath, she swiped to answer. "Mason," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "You think you've won, don't you?" Mason's voice was low, dripping with menace. There was no hiding the satisfaction in his tone, but there was also something else there, something darker. "You think you can run off with your little folder and change everything, but you're wrong. You're so wrong." Jasmine's grip on her phone tightened. She didn't reply immediately, hoping to catch him off guard. But Mason wasn't fooled. He continued. "I have eyes everywhere, Jasmine," he said, the words oozing with threat. "You and Lila have no idea what you're dealing with. You're walking right into my trap." A chill ran down her spine. It was exactly what she had feared. Mason wasn't just going to let them slip away. He'd been watching them the entire time. He knew where they were, and now he was playing his final card. "What do you want, Mason?" Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice steady, to keep the fear from seeping into her words. "I want you to understand one thing," he replied, his tone colder now. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than anything you can handle. You're not going to get away. It's already too late." The call abruptly ended, leaving nothing but the eerie silence between them. Jasmine lowered the phone slowly, her mind racing with what he'd said. "We've been set up. He knows exactly where we are." Lila's hands tightened around the wheel, but her eyes never left the road. "What do we do now?" Jasmine thought quickly. She had to remain calm, had to think through their options. There was no turning back now. "Head to the rendezvous point," she said, her voice sharp. "We can't let him control the narrative. We're handing over the evidence, no matter what." "But if he's waiting for us," Lila's voice trailed off. "We won't let him get the upper hand," Jasmine said firmly. "We have to trust that our contact will help us. This is our only shot." Lila nodded but didn't respond. She turned the car down another side street, avoiding the main roads now, just as they'd planned. The feeling of being hunted was thick in the air, and Jasmine couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. Mason was close, she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. They had to hurry. The car veered off the street and into a quieter part of the city, the lights dimming as they entered an industrial area. It was a risk, but it was the best option. The rendezvous point wasn't far now. The car finally stopped outside an old warehouse, the location carefully chosen for its seclusion. Jasmine's pulse quickened as she glanced around, her eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. Lila killed the engine, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension was suffocating, and Jasmine's thoughts raced. What if Mason had already gotten to their contact? What if this whole thing had been a trap from the start? "We're here," Lila said, her voice trembling slightly. Jasmine nodded, pushing open the door. "Let's do this." They made their way toward the door of the warehouse, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The door creaked as they entered, and Jasmine's eyes adjusted to the low light. She could make out the silhouette of a figure standing in the far corner. "It's him," Lila whispered, her hand tight around the strap of her bag. Jasmine nodded and stepped forward, the folder in her hand feeling like the heaviest thing in the world. Every step they took felt like a step closer to the unknown, a step closer to whatever was waiting for them on the other side of this. When they reached the figure, it stepped into the light, revealing a man in his early 40s, wearing a plain shirt and jeans, his face familiar. It was their contact, Jason, the journalist. "Good to see you both," Jason said, his voice low but steady. "We don't have much time." Jasmine handed him the folder, her fingers trembling slightly. "This is everything," she said. "It's all there. Take it to the authorities. They'll take Mason down." Jason glanced at the folder before meeting her eyes. "You're sure this is everything?" "Yes," Jasmine replied. "It's enough to destroy him." Jason nodded grimly. "Then it's time for the reckoning." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. Jasmine's heart pounded, but for the first time, she allowed herself a small breath of relief. They had done it. They had taken down the man who had haunted their every step. But in the back of her mind, the fear still lingered. Mason wasn't finished. Not yet. Jason turned and started to walk away, and Jasmine and Lila followed. They had done what they set out to do, but they both knew that the battle wasn't truly over. Mason had lost this round, but he wouldn't go down without a fight. As they stepped back into the shadows, Jasmine's heart beat a little lighter. The truth was out there. And there was no turning back now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?